In the fading years of the reign of Henry VIII, on the quiet yet strategic banks of the River Thames, there stood a palace that was more than just a royal residence. It was a statement, a declaration of power carved into red brick and stone. This was Hampton Court Palace. From a distance, it looked like something out of a dream, towers rising into the sky, chimneys stacked like a forest of stone, vast gateways guarding what lay inside. Gardens stretched outward in careful symmetry, while great halls promised feasts, music, and splendor. But that image, that peaceful, majestic vision only told half the story, because Hampton Court was not built for peace. It was built for control. The palace had not even begun as Henry's. It was originally the ambitious project of Thomas Wolsey, the king's powerful advisor. Wolsey wanted to impress foreign ambassadors, English nobles, and above all, the king himself. And he succeeded perhaps too well. The palace was so magnificent that it captured Henry's attention. And in Tudor England, when the king admired something, it often became his. By the 1540s, after extensive rebuilding and expansion, Hampton Court had transformed into one of the most advanced and sophisticated palaces in England. But inside those walls, something deeper was happening. Hampton Court was not just a home, it was a system, a living machine. It functioned as a seat of government, a royal court, a luxury residence, a workplace, and even a political battlefield, all at the same time. Hundreds of people lived and worked there daily. Servants rushed through corridors carrying supplies. Officials whispered urgent messages. Courtiers lingered in doorways just hoping to be noticed. Because in Hampton Court, being seen could change your life. Under the Tudor monarchy, the king did not separate his personal life from politics. Wherever Henry went, England went with him. Government decisions were made in his presence. Foreign ambassadors traveled to meet him. Nobles competed for his favor. Families sent their sons and daughters to court, dreaming of opportunity. And Hampton Court was one of the most important stages for all of it. But for a newcomer, the palace was overwhelming. It was crowded, alive with movement, yet strangely controlled. Because Hampton Court was designed like a filter. The outer courts were open, noisy, and busy. But as you moved deeper inside, things changed. Doors became fewer. Guards became stricter. Rooms became quieter and more exclusive, until finally you reached the inner chambers, spaces where only the most trusted individuals were allowed. And at the very center of it all was the king. Access to Henry VIII was everything. It was power, it was influence, it was survival. A nobleman with titles but no access might be ignored. But a man who helped dress the king in the morning. A man who stood beside him in private chambers. That man could shape decisions. Because at Hampton Court, closeness to the king was more valuable than rank itself. Even Henry's daily routine was carefully controlled. According to royal household rules, his morning began with precision. Servants rose early to light fires and prepare his chambers. 6 selected gentlemen of the Privy Chamber were assigned to dress him. No one else was allowed to touch the king unless specifically permitted. Even the barber had strict instructions. He had to arrive clean, prepared, and properly equipped. Because serving the king's body was not a simple task. It was an honor. In this world, nothing was ordinary. Dressing the king was not just dressing, it was ceremony. Touching him was not casual, it was privilege. And being allowed into his private space meant you were part of an elite inner circle built on trust, silence, and loyalty. For many men at court, the ultimate goal was not land or wealth. It was proximity, to stand near Henry, to speak to him, to be remembered by him. Because one moment of royal attention could raise a man to greatness. And one mistake could destroy him just as quickly. The deeper you went into Hampton Court, the clearer one truth became. Power was not just held, it was measured in steps, measured in doors, measured in how close you could stand to the king. And for most people living in the palace, that distance never truly disappeared. Inside Hampton Court Palace, magnificence was everywhere. Rich tapestries lined the walls, gold-threaded garments shimmered in candlelight, music echoed through chambers designed to impress. But beneath that beauty, there was something else. A system of labor so vast, so relentless that without it the palace would collapse. Because Hampton Court did not run on luxury, it ran on work. Hidden behind the grand halls and royal chambers were the kitchens, one of the busiest and most demanding spaces in all of Tudor England. Here, more than 200 workers labored every single day. Cooks, grooms, pages, servants of every rank, together they produced over 800 meals daily. This was not gentle, refined cooking. This was industrial-scale food production centuries before the industrial age. Fires burned constantly. Huge spits rotated endless cuts of meat. Pastry ovens glowed with heat. Workers moved in organized chaos, cutting, boiling, baking, carrying. Every movement had to be precise. Every dish had to arrive on time. Because at court, food was not just nourishment, it was status. A mistake in the kitchens was not a small error. It was a failure of royal dignity, serving the wrong person, delaying a meal, running out of ales. These were not inconveniences, they were political problems. Food at Hampton Court revealed hierarchy as clearly as the architecture itself. At the top sat Henry VIII, dining privately with carefully prepared meals, often crafted by his personal French chefs. His dishes were elaborate, varied, and designed to reflect power. He did not eat among the crowd. He remained separate, always. Below him were the highest-ranking courtiers. They dined in exclusive chambers close to the king's presence. Further down were mid-ranking members of the court. And then came the majority. In the Great Hall, hundreds gathered to eat together. Up to 600 people could be served in 2 sittings twice a day. Long wooden tables, shared meals. Little privacy. This was communal living structured by rank, even in something as basic as eating. The message was clear: you are what your position allows you to consume. And yet for many, this life was still desirable. Because Hampton Court provided something rare: free food and lodging. Courtiers were entitled to meals, rooms, sometimes even candles, wine, and beer. It was generous, but it came at a cost: dependence. To live at court was to rely on the king's household for everything. Your comfort, your survival, your future, everything flowed from the king. Even where you slept mattered. Hampton Court was not a private palace for a single family. It was a crowded royal community. Rooms were assigned based on status through rules known as the Bouch of Court. Higher rank meant better rooms, more space, more privacy, more comfort. Lower-ranking individuals lived very differently. Shared rooms, limited space. Less comfort, constant noise. In a world obsessed with status, even your bed became a statement about your worth. And then there was the reality no one liked to speak about: hygiene. Despite popular myths, Tudor people did wash. Even Henry VIII himself enjoyed luxurious bathing, sometimes in scented water infused with herbs. He even had access to hot and cold running water, something rare for the time. But that comfort did not extend to everyone, far from it. For lower-ranking members of the court, conditions were far less pleasant. Communal toilets known as jakes were common. Chamber pots were used in private rooms. And one of the most striking features of Hampton Court was the Great House of Easement, a large shared toilet block by the river. It could seat up to 14 people at once. Meanwhile, the king's personal toilet, the close stool, was richly decorated with velvet, ribbons, and fine materials. Even here rank defined experience. This contrast was everywhere: luxury and discomfort, cleanliness and crowding, order and pressure, because the palace concentrated everything in one place. People, food, waste, ambition, and that concentration created strain: heat from kitchens, noise from crowded halls, waste that needed constant removal. Endless demand for supplies from the surrounding land. Hampton Court could not sustain this pressure forever, which is why the Tudor court did something surprising. It moved. The king and his court would regularly travel between palaces, not just for pleasure but for necessity, to allow places like Hampton Court to be cleaned, restocked, reset. When Henry VIII traveled, it was a spectacle. He often moved along the River Thames in a grand royal barge. The Queen beside him, servants following in smaller boats, courtiers riding on horseback along the riverbanks. It was not just travel, it was theater, because life at Hampton Court was never still. People arrived, they settled, they competed. They watched and then they moved again. To live here meant endurance, expense, patience, because if you wanted to stay close to power, you had to follow it, and while the palace glittered above, it was this constant movement, labor, and pressure below that kept it alive. Life inside Hampton Court Palace was not only about survival, labor, and hierarchy. It was also about performance, because everything the court did was meant to be seen. Under Henry VIII, the palace became more than a residence. It became a stage, and every person inside it was part of the show. Entertainment was not simply leisure, it was politics in disguise. Feasts were grand and carefully arranged. Music filled the chambers, lutes, voices, and instruments echoing through high ceilings. Games were played not just for fun but for bonding, rivalry, and influence. Even laughter had purpose. The king himself was deeply involved in this culture. Henry VIII was famously energetic, especially in his younger years. He loved physical activity: hunting, hawking, tennis, gambling. These were not idle hobbies. They were displays of strength, masculinity, and royal vitality. And the court followed his lead. Because to match the king's energy was to remain visible. To fall behind was to disappear. Outside, the grounds of Hampton Court were designed for spectacle. Wide open spaces allowed for grand events. Most striking of all was the Tiltyard, a specially built arena for tournaments. From 5 towering viewing platforms, spectators could watch knights clash in displays of skill and courage. These tournaments were not just entertainment, they were theater. A way to show that the Tudor court was strong, noble, and alive with chivalric tradition. Everything reinforced the same message: This was a powerful kingdom, ruled by a powerful king. Even architecture played its role. The Great Hall, rebuilt by Henry, was designed in a grand hammerbeam style that echoed medieval kingship. Its vast roof, towering space, and magnificent tapestries told a story without words, a story of legacy, of authority, of continuity. Hampton Court was new, but it was designed to feel eternal. And yet the most powerful performances at court were not always about strength, they were about belief. Religion at Hampton Court was deeply intertwined with royal authority. At the heart of it stood the Chapel Royal, a place of worship and a place of image. The chapel was one of the most beautiful spaces in the palace. Its vaulted ceiling, installed in the 1530s, remains one of the finest examples of Tudor craftsmanship. Gold details shimmered above, light filtered through stained glass, voices rose in sacred harmony. But even here hierarchy remained. The king did not stand among the people. Henry VIII sat in a private elevated pew above the congregation, separate, visible, unmistakably royal. Even in worship, distance defined power. This separation mattered more than ever during Henry's reign, because religion itself had changed, dramatically. Through the English Reformation, Henry had broken away from the authority of Rome. He had dissolved monasteries, seized church wealth, redefined religious life across England, and Hampton Court became one of the places where this new order was displayed. Ceremonies were no longer just acts of faith, they were statements of control. The king was not only the ruler of England, he was the head of its church. Every service, every procession, every ritual reinforced that reality. Gold, music, architecture, and ceremony all worked together to project one powerful idea. Obedience to the king was absolute. But behind the beauty of these performances there was tension, because belief was no longer simple, it was political. And in a court where every action was watched, even faith could be dangerous. Hampton Court was a place where celebration and control existed side by side, where laughter echoed through halls, but silence held just as much power, where games built alliances and worship reinforced authority. Nothing was ever just what it seemed, because at Hampton Court life was not only lived, it was performed. Inside Hampton Court Palace, no world was more intimate or more dangerous than the world of the queens. Because this palace was not just where Henry VIII ruled, it was where he loved, where he married, where he hoped for an heir, and where those hopes could collapse without warning. All 6 of Henry's wives passed through Hampton Court. That alone tells you how central the palace was to his life. It was not simply a political center. It was a place where dynasty itself unfolded. Within these walls there were moments of joy, pregnancies celebrated, alliances strengthened, new beginnings imagined, but there were also moments of fear. Rivalries whispered in corridors, eyes watching from behind tapestries, secrets carried from one chamber to another, because for a queen at Hampton Court, favor was everything. And favor could vanish overnight. The story of Jane Seymour captures both the hope and tragedy of this place. In October 1537, within Hampton Court, she gave Henry what he had long desired. A son, the future Edward VI. It should have been a moment of complete triumph, and for a brief time it was. But only 12 days later, Jane Seymour died, in the same palace that had delivered Henry's greatest victory. He suffered one of his deepest personal losses. Hampton Court became, in that moment, a place of both celebration and mourning. A reminder that even for a king, power could not control everything. Another queen's story reveals an even darker side. Catherine Howard was young, likely still a teenager when Henry chose her as his 5th wife. At first, he adored her. He called her his rose without a thorn. But at Hampton Court, everything changed. In the Chapel Royal, a letter was handed to the king. It contained accusations, secrets from Catherine's past, rumors that would soon become scandal. The effect was immediate. The marriage collapsed. The court turned, and Catherine's fate was sealed. She was later executed at the Tower of London in 1542. At Hampton Court, favor did not fade quietly. It shattered in full view of a court trained to watch everything. Yet not every queen's story ended in tragedy. Catherine Parr, Henry's final wife, represents a different kind of strength. She married him at Hampton Court, but unlike others, she survived. She was intelligent, politically aware, careful. She helped reconcile Henry with his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. She even served as regent while the king campaigned in France. Her time at Hampton Court shows that the palace was not only a place of danger. It could also be a place of influence, of quiet power. But even for Catherine Parr, safety was never guaranteed. She too faced accusations, plots, danger. At Hampton Court, survival itself was an achievement. And beyond the queens, the experience for women at court was equally complex. Young noblewomen came to serve in the queen's household. They danced, attended feasts, participated in entertainments, and most importantly, they were sane. For families, this was opportunity. A chance for advantageous marriages, for alliances, for rising status, but visibility came with risk. Anne Boleyn had once been a lady-in-waiting when Henry noticed her. Catherine Howard met him while serving in another queen's household. At Hampton Court, a single moment could change everything, for better. Or for worse, because the path upward was real, but it was narrow, and it ran along the edge of danger. This is what made life at Hampton Court so powerful and so unstable. It was a place of beauty and pressure, of ceremony and survival, of luxury and labor. For some, it offered the finest food, rich chambers, and direct access to the most powerful man in England. For others, it meant long hours, crowded rooms, and constant uncertainty. Every part of the palace served a purpose. The Great Hall projected royal strength. The Chapel Royal displayed sacred authority. The kitchens proved the court could sustain itself on a massive scale. The guarded chambers reminded everyone that access to the king was rare and precious. Even the river approach added to the illusion of control. Arrivals were staged. Departures were dramatic. Everything was designed to reinforce power. Because Hampton Court was not just built to house a king. It was built to convince everyone that kingship itself was something greater than ordinary life. So what was life really like inside Hampton Court under Henry VIII? It was dazzling, but it was also disciplined. It was comfortable for some, harsh for many, and uncertain for almost everyone. It was a place where meals became ceremony, rooms became ladders, service became politics, and marriage became state business. To live there was to wake each day inside a system built around one man. His body, his favor, his power. Hampton Court was one of the greatest palaces in England, but more than anything else, it was Henry VIII himself, transformed into brick, ritual, movement, and display.